Xbox launches in North America. Sony invests in Square. And Sega takes trade shows by storm. These stories and many more on this episode of the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine.
I've been waiting a long time for a chance to say this. Stop the presses.
Requiescat in pace.
Makes him crazy, man. What is a man?
It's me, Mario.
What a mess.
Get over here!
Please save me.
Welcome back to the Video Game Newsroom Time Machine, the show where we travel back in time 40, 30, and 20 years to find out what was making headlines in the video game and home computer industry of yesteryear. Today we're going to be traveling back 20 years to December of 2002. My name is Carl, and I'm joined again by one of our favorite co-hosts, John. Welcome back, John.
It's good to be back. Thank you for the invite.
Oh, please. Always a pleasure. So we need the obligatory pre-podcast content banter. So what you been up to?
Well, first off, Happy New Year.
Oh, yes, thank you. Yeah, we're recording this on the 5th of January, so.
Oh, well, it's the 4th for me.
Oh, that's true. It's still the 4th for you. Okay.
I mean, we are time travelers, so.
We're talking through a portal. Yeah, that's it.
I like it.
So what you been up to? You've been busy. You guys just dropped a new episode of the Retro Game Squad.
Oh my goodness! Yeah, we dropped like 4.5 hour whopper right at the end of the year as our little thank you gift to everybody. So, yeah, we're real proud of that, and that was a really cool thing. Should definitely check it out if you listen to us normally.
Yeah, I've already listened through it. Some really really nice stuff in there. I mean, and it was a change up of the format, so each of you was just doing one game.
Yes, we had a special guest. It was our special guest plus Alex, Jeff, and I. So we did 4 games total. Yeah, we had done that for our RPG episode, like years ago now. It's been a bit. This year. September marks our 10-year anniversary. How wild is that? Yeah, so it's
insane.
Yeah, but I'm happy to be kicking off with you guys.
Yeah, no, definitely, man. Yeah, I think I jumped in like year 1.5 or something.
Oh, I'm sorry. That early long stuff was rough.
It was, but at the same time, it had that charm about it. So yeah, no, dude, it's been a great ride.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I appreciate. Yeah, we at this point I can say we go way back. It's been awesome having you as like a friend of the podcast and just a genuine friend at this point. So
yeah, dude, really, it's been an awesome thing because it's like after listening to you guys for so long, it really felt like I knew you guys, but it was always just some forum chat and stuff, and to actually get to know you now, it is a really cool thing.
Yeah, I'm gonna joke that that you get to yell at me and I get to respond, and vice versa. Jeff usually says that, but I definitely feel it here.
Yeah,
yeah. All love from this side of the microphone.
True that. Okay, so everybody remember, links to everything is in the show notes. Go check out the RGS, and also remember that when we're talking about December of 2002, we're always using cover dates of publications. We know the news happened at some time before that, but it is simply a convention for the show. Other than that, we've got a couple of orders of business before we turn on the time machine. The first of which, of course, is our segment, The 7 Minutes in Heaven, where the co-host has to play a game that was reviewed in a publication dated December 2002 that they have never played before. And we have a very, very special game this time. A game that in Japan was known as Gekibo 2, a sequel to a Japan-exclusive PC Engine title that is now getting a fresh coat of paint on the PlayStation 2. Now, this game was supposed to be released in the West, and we'll talk about that more later, as Polaroid Pete. John, are you ready to delve into Polaroid Pete?
Oh, I am more than ready. Let's do it.
Awesome. Welcome back, John, from your 7 minutes in heaven with Polaroid Pete. So, if you were going to describe this game to somebody who's never seen it before, what would you tell them it is?
Oh, wow. Yeah, I dropped a pretty good one earlier. I would say this is Pokemon Snap, except not first person and very Japanese.
Oh, that is a very good way of describing it. So let's get into the mechanics. So you already told us it's not 3D, it's 2D. How does that manifest itself in the game, or what's going on?
Yeah, sure. It's a self-scrolling, I'm going to say shooter in the context of you're taking pictures of the camera. You're moving a reticle around, which is essentially your camera focus, and you're trying to take pictures of things for points. And you'll use one stick to move, and then you can zoom in and out with one of the, I think it's R2. You can zoom in and out to focus on certain things, and just you're a guy who is trying to take pictures for a newspaper. That's okay. I don't know if I can describe it better.
No, that's an excellent description. And there's all sorts of weird stuff happening that you need to photograph. Now, is it a straight 2D game, or is it a hybrid?
Oh, it's definitely a hybrid. You had mentioned this as a sequel, which I was not familiar with.
The original game is on the PC Engine, also a Japan exclusive, and it was called Kikibo. I'll put links to it in the show notes. The sprite in that game looks almost identical to the sprite in this game, obviously with less colors, and the basic game mechanic of moving a cursor around while also having some basic control over the main character seems to be the same. I haven't played the PC Engine version, but the screenshots make it look very similar. Obviously, in the PlayStation 2, now they've also added some depth because the sprites of the other characters are not just on different parallax levels. They are actually in a 3D depth environment with the buildings being made out of polygons. So that gives it a much deeper feel, but it doesn't look like the base mechanics of the game are that different.
Yeah, I definitely want to check that out. Yeah, it's a really good mix and kind of one of my favorites. It kind of, I guess, Parappa the Rapper kind of had a similar style for something that actually came out in the US that is a little more popular. So it's like that 3D in the background, but the 2D flat characters. I'm a sucker for pixelation in anything or any sort of sprite art, and this happened to fit right in.
Exactly. Another good example for people would be the Final Fantasy Tactics game on the PlayStation.
Oh, that's a good one. That's another good one.
Yeah. And there was a bunch of those. I think the Saturn also did that for a ton of games. The RPGs on the Saturn did a lot of those 2D sprites on a 3D background.
Yeah, I'm thinking of like Guardian Heroes and pretty much all the tactic clones that are out there.
Yeah. So this now, did you have fun with the game?
Oh yeah, absolutely. I only got 7 minutes with this, and I'm cursing you because I really want to get more now. So like literally the moment we're done recording and wrap up, I might throw in another round because I made it through the first level, but there's a lot more game to be had there very clearly.
Oh yeah, there's a lot more game to be had. Now, unfortunately, this game never got released in the West. Like I said, it was called Gekibo 2 in Japan, and we're using the reference here. It was reviewed in the UK's Edge magazine. So they would occasionally review these Japanese games, even before there was a fixed schedule for them to be released in the West, or quite often because they thought they would never get released in the West. And this one did get picked up for release in the West. It later on did actually get reviewed in a few magazines. There's at least one review in a German magazine of Polaroid Pete, but for whatever reason, it never actually ships. And it has this weird tie-in with Polaroid and their iZone camera. Honestly, I'm going to have to look that up and put a note about it in the show notes, what that even was. But I'm guessing it was some digital camera that they were developing. It's clearly not been added to the Pete sprite, but there are some Polaroid signs in the background when you're walking around the levels and stuff. So, but for whatever reason, it never actually got released. A full translated copy of the game is up on the internet to be found, and that's how we ended up getting to play it.
Yeah, it was nice to know what was going on. Having no English context would have been difficult getting in, but it's worth checking out, especially that European release. But it's Europe was the 50 hertz region on those retro games, so you might have your mileage may vary on a non UK TV.
Yeah, if you're not using an emulator and using original hardware, you will have to worry about the frequency on the TV. So if you have a multi-norm television set that can actually switch, then you're okay. If not, you're going to have to get some kind of adapter or something to be able to do that. Now, in the video version of the 7 minutes, where we actually get to see you play, which is available for the Patreon patrons. Remember, everybody, just $1 a month. Links in the show notes. Your TV, or was it the TV, or was it the translator device, was popping in occasionally with a little message saying that the frequency had changed?
Yeah, it was the scaler that I have. It also looks like it switches resolutions dynamically too. There's a couple of famous games that have issues when you go to like an inventory screen, it loads a lower resolution than the actual gameplay, which would be double that resolution. It's just an interesting mix of tech to make all that happen.
Oh, definitely. And it is one of those cool things that you don't see that much in consoles nowadays. But in a lot of retro systems, the Amiga was infamous for this, where the programmers could decide what resolution to use at any given time. So there's games that are constantly jumping between resolutions for different things. And it's one of those very, very weird throwbacks to a time when, processing power was so tight that, if we can save a little bit here, let's do it. And so that's what you end up with on some of these games. But it was cool to see your hardware actually telling us that.
Right. Yeah, that's usually something I edit out, but I figured I'd leave it in as a little bonus there.
Oh, definitely. And it just adds to it, especially because we were dealing with a PAL release of what was originally an NTSC game, because Japan has NTSC.
Right.
So it's like they had to translate the NTSC game into PAL and then still didn't release it. And now we're playing it, or you're playing it in North America. I'm not, but you're playing in North America on North American hardware. It's kind of weird.
Right. Well, all modern hardware is 60 hertz now. It's wild. This is such a weird game. I just don't know. I appreciate you exposing me to this, because I don't think this is one I would have discovered naturally, but now I've got my eyes on this whole series apparently.
Yeah, there's only 2 games. There's no further game after this. This was developed by Irem of R-Type fame, but Irem, once the arcade died, Irem really didn't figure out how to properly reinvent themselves for the console age. And so while there's the occasional release from them, this was already them on the downward spiral, unfortunately.
Man, that's a bummer. I would have liked to see what they could do with, I guess, the same format on newer hardware.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, if you took this into modern hardware with much higher resolutions, and you could really do some amazing looking graphics on this, but I think it's also a game that would be very resource intensive for creation, because there's so many visual gags that have to be added that can't repeat themselves. That the
true.
Art assets in the game, even though they're not going to take up a lot of space, are pretty freaking intensive, and also you're going to need people writing those gags. So it's a different mix of talents and resource allocation than your typical game, even though it plays very much like an arcade game. I mean, I could imagine this as an arcade cabinet game, It's move left to right like a shooter.
Right.
Point at stuff, get a high score, beat the high score. It feels very much like an arcade game, not like a console game in that sense.
Yeah, that's very thought provoking. I would love to hold on to, I guess in this case, a fake Polaroid camera and shoot it and maneuver it. It like those what were those like tank gunner games? I know you know what I'm talking about. You grab the two sides and you like
like Battlezone or anything with a tank control. Yeah,
exactly. Just that, except a Polaroid camera. Let's make it happen.
That would be awesome. And you'd have you just imagine it. You twist the camera around so you basically have an FPS perspective because it's already a 3D environment that you're moving through. And you see the 2D sprites all around you, and you have stuff happening on the left and the right and above and below. And that would be a pretty kick-ass game right there.
Yeah, whoever's paying attention to this and is thinking about doing a reboot, that's your ticket right there. We've practically done the work for you.
And you can almost set it up like the combat system in Panzer Dragoon, where you're always switching 90-degree angles to the sides and the back and the front.
It writes itself, man.
Oh, dude. Panzer Dragoon meets Polaroid Pete. And you can still then have it on rails, basically. Oh, yeah, no. Okay, this is awesome. This is a great concept. Okay, good. So, I think we're done with our 7 minutes in heaven, and it is time to check in with our very own warden of the Department of Corrections, Ethan Johnson, to find out what I got wrong in our November 2002 jump. Welcome back, Ethan, to the Department of Corrections. And
come inside. Have a nice, comfortable seat. Are you relaxed? Okay. Are you good?
Why are the walls made out of gingerbread? What's going on here?
Don't question these things, okay? It's just how it's meant to be. So, yes, you're in the Department of Corrections, the most positive work environment you have ever been in. Yes, read this card. Read this card.
Okay. I have the card in front of me. I, Carl Kuros, welcome you into my home. Are you a vampire? Are you a vampire? You got to tell me if you're a vampire. This is like the cop.
So yes, we are in the Department of Correction for November of 2001.
Before you correct me for all the sins of that episode, we have
the Peter comment. Woo-hoo. That was a vaguely sounding Christmas thing. That's my further attempt to get you in the holiday mood. Is everyone in the holiday mood? Do you see this gingerbread? Do you know how long it takes to coat walls with gingerbread?
Yeah, you mean it's not structurally sound gingerbread?
So the Peter comment. Talking about launch lineups. You know, he made the observation that many launch lineups are not exactly always the greatest. And I mean, that's just, in the nature of the console. You can't always put out your best game right at the front. You have to build up a library and understand what you're doing with the system, all that sort of stuff. Some people get very obsessed on launch lineups. If it doesn't come out with so many games, or the games aren't the absolute greatest, then it was a failure of a launch. And that'll be something that I'll be coming back to in an episode we will be doing later, but we'll hold off on that for now.
Mm. Yes, that there are a few of those still coming down the pipeline.
Yes. So let us push forward to November 2001. Let's be nice and calm. And Carl, how could you call Wave Race Blue Storm bad? What is this?
It's because I played it, and I've played the previous Wave Race, not the first one on Game Boy, but the second one on N64, and the GameCube version was in all relevant and important aspects.
You are just so terribly wrong.
There's a reason why there hasn't been another Wave Race since, because Blue Storm was bad.
No. I refuse this. You have been corrected. You must wear this mark of shame for the rest of the year. I know that's not very long, but yes. So yes, that is my little outburst for the day. I will say that we are recording this on the same day that the episode was put out, and I didn't fully finish the episode, but still somehow I came up with a number of corrections.
We didn't have to do this one just yet. We still have a few weeks to finish this one.
Well, maybe we'll suture something in later, but right now I'm going to call this fine and dandy. So let us continue on. Pronunciation, it is Akihabara, not Ahikabara, which is very hard to say.
Akihabara. Or
Akihabara.
Akihabara. Okay, I can do that.
Yes. And next up, the Resident Evil remake was just called Resident Evil. So there's in fact 3 games called Resident Evil. The original that originally released on PlayStation 1 and then was ported to other things and whatnot. Then Resident Evil, the GameCube game, and then the remake called Resident Evil, which was the remake or it's a remaster of the remake. So people just call it RE make.
That's
I find very fun.
Clever and yeah, it's clever. I'll give him that. That is clever.
And next on the pot, we have Sega, and you were wondering if they had been releasing games for Nintendo's handhelds at the time, and yes, indeed, they had. They had released a couple GBA games by then.
Okay, yeah, I wasn't quite sure how the release schedules overlapped or not, because the GBA hadn't been out that long either. So, okay. Well, did they already release that terrible, terrible version of Sonic the Hedgehog for the GBA?
No, that was later. That was, that was not 2001. It was later than that.
Gotcha. Okay, cool.
And you mean the port of Sonic, or do you mean like the BioWare one?
Ooh, good question. I know there was one GBA Sonic that was just absolutely atrocious. And I can't remember if it was the port or if it was a later title. That I don't know.
As I recall, the actual port was the bad one. Some people like the Advanced series, whatever that was called, on and then I think they had one on DS too. Anyways, so yes, Sega had published some games on Nintendo systems, but with the launch of the GameCube, they're first on a Nintendo home console.
Gotcha. Yes. A wonderful moment of brotherly love.
You know, Sega puts out some interesting games, and I'm glad all the stuff that they ported from the Dreamcast to the GameCube, you know, Skies of Radiance, Sonic Adventure, and then, of course, they ported other stuff to the Xbox, like Jet Grind Radio, or is it Jet Set Radio? I can't remember. Anyways.
It's Jet Grind Radio on the Xbox, and I believe Jet Set Radio on the Dreamcast. Just minor name changes, but the games are almost identical. There's a few tweaks.
I always get confused. People make it confusing. But let us put that aside. And next up, you did a reductive description of a thing in a side quest in Majora's Mask, because you were talking about how people liked their Zelda edgy and mature and all that. I mean, I love Majora's Mask. That is one of my favorite games. But I will just have to quibble with the way that you described it. You said that the two lovers decide to die together, but that's not actually their intention. The moon is incidental to the story. They decide to get married despite the fact that Cafe has age regressed, basically, which I mean is kind of a weird concept in that sense, but you know, he's still.
You're not making it better, but you are making it more mature. I'll give you that.
So that is just the full explanation. But then when you were describing the interviews in Supercade, which came out about the same time as another book that we'll be talking about in a sec, you said that one of the interviewees was Nunt Buschholz.
And this, I'm going to blame this completely on recording quality once we do this over Skype, and not in any way admit that I massacred the name of Nolan Bushnell.
To imagine the German Nolan Bushnell. Who would that be?
Nolan Bushnell. We have ways of making you talk. And I don't know, somehow that went from being a Nazi to a communist. I have no idea. I got nothing.
I mean, you are at the center of both. Right there.
That's true. That is true. That is true.
Right along the dividing line. So
about an hour and a half away from the dividing line.
I don't actually
close enough. Close enough.
Don't worry, Carl. I don't know.
And I'm keeping it that way.
And I got a last minute thing in just as we were getting ready to record. I got a thing in from Alex Smith, for he knows a bit more about this than I do. You were wondering the question of why did Interplay sign an exclusive publishing deal with Vivendi right before they were bought by Tidus. And even though he didn't have a specific thing as to why this might be, I know he's talked to Brian Fargo and whatnot, but I don't know if he has asked him the specific question. But he did note that MCA Universal was invested in Interplay in the 1990s, and then Vivendi buys MCA. So that is likely what the connection is, that they were already invested within Interplay.
Okay, gotcha. Okay, so that would make a lot of sense. Still, I mean, it doesn't make a lot of sense that they would sign this deal knowing that Tidus was going to buy them. And Tidus
it was not I'm not going to say it was a hostile takeover. I mean, Interplay, I don't think was public, so you can't really do that. But they didn't want to be bought by Tidus. That I know for absolute.
Well, if they weren't publicly traded, then some private holder had to sell their stock to Tidus.
Yeah, but those equity holders don't always have the best interest of the company in mind. They have the best interest of their dividends in mind.
Very true.
And so, Brian Fargo had lost control by that point because he didn't have full range on everything, and now he's sold out to Microsoft. I mean, he keeps making money on this, so I'm not feeling too bad for his bank account or anything. But
no, he's not hurting. He's not hurting.
Yeah,
he can buy the good Mackins is what we're trying to say.
And next up, the Pools of Radiance, Runes of Myth Draenor. You said it came out under the Atari label, but actually it came out under Ubisoft. I don't know if it originally might have been Atari that was doing it, because Atari does later put out a lot of D&D games, publishing them. But they did not do Pools of Radiance.
Yeah, and we just looked this up. They did Ubisoft, but there was later on, I believe it may have been a European exclusive, but there was this box of, Atari classic adventure games or whatever, a bundle of their RPG output, and that was in that bundle. That's probably what I had in the back of my head when I said that.
And finally, we talk about the books that you mentioned before, and we're wondering if only the first edition of Kent, the first quarter, was out yet. Indeed, in November 2001, it was only the first quarter, and the Ultimate History of Video Games would be published in December 2001, late December, I'm pretty sure. And speaking of that,
yes,
I have finished an epic read-through of The Ultimate History of Video Games by Stephen Kent. I live streamed it all, and I've audited, and it's up on a playlist. You can go to my Twitter if you want to get a link to the playlist and all that. And we will do an episode looking back on 20 years of the influence of Stephen Kent within the field of video game history at some point.
Yes, we need to get on that. You just need to tell me when you can record it, and I will make my mic hot, and we will sit down and pump that episode out, because he is, for better or for worse, one of the most important and influential people in the history of video games.
Indeed. I think the majority of people who have gotten into this field, quote unquote, as I always like to say with the big quotes, that they got in through Kent. And so looking back on the legacy of that should be particularly interesting. I'm hoping I can get Alex to come on as well. He was there for many of the live streams. Not the last one, though, unfortunately.
Yeah, I was there intermittently. I kept jumping in occasionally to listen in.
Yes, but you can look forward to us talking about Kent. And while I'm distracted with that, you better run, Carl. Run away from the Department of Corrections, for you are done with November of 2001, and I will look you up again for December of 1981.
I'm looking forward to it.
Say it like you mean it.
I'm looking forward to it.
Wonderful.
Okay, yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, man. See you next time.
Bye-bye.
Man, the Ultimate History of Video Games, That's an interesting one.
Yes, it's so interesting that we have already recorded, and it should be out about a week after this episode, a panel discussion between myself, mainly as moderator. Ethan is there. Alex Smith of They Create Worlds is there. And of course, Dale, and I'm not going to kill it this time, Geddes, also known as Quarter Past. You guys, longtime listeners, will have heard him when we did our 1979 FCC regulation special. So we had this really great panel discussion, ran for just shy of 2 hours, talking about the ins and outs and the influence of Kent's Ultimate History of Video Games, many of the egregious mistakes in statements about the history or very one-sided accounts of the history of the industry that are in that book. So it is a very flawed book, spoiler alert, and we go into quite a bit of that. Ethan just finished his 50-hour-long read-through of the book that he streamed, which is also out there. I'll put a link in the show notes. But our discussion on it was very, very lively. We had some really, really interesting thought exchanges on how to better disseminate accurate information about the history of the industry and so forth. So that's all coming next week.
Very cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's weird to think about a book like that. I guess, with my unfamiliarity of it, I'll have to check that out, what your guys' work was. But for the time, because the history preservation and just how much exposure it has now is not anything like when that book came out. So,
and that's one of the things that we do go into is, despite all of its mistakes, it was the starting point for so many people to get interested in the field. And for that, it has a very important historical role. But he just released, this last August, he just released a second volume of the book. And the first volume the original book has also been reprinted with virtually no changes. So all of the mistakes are still there. And it's quite frustrating for those of us who try to be as accurate as possible with the retelling of this history, that the most prominent work, by far the most prominent work on the subject, is basically just riddled with flaws. It's almost like saying, the number one selling book on the history of America keeps claiming that Washington really did cut down a cherry tree or some nonsense like that,
Right.
And a lot of the urban legends that are considered gospel truth by the vast majority of gamers that are not true, some of them are, but that are not true, got codified, if not directly birthed, in this book. So it's not something I would recommend people to pick up. And if you want to find out why, listen to the show. But it is, from a historical standpoint, a very important starting point for what we do here, for what Alex does, what Ethan does, and so on and so on.
Very cool.
That's it. So that's coming. Oh, and the video version will be Patreon exclusive. So, of course, go and support us there. Okay, but enough plugging. We've got to turn on a time machine. Are you ready, John?
I am ready.
Excellent. Then off to our last jump in the year 2001, December of 2001.
Nintendo's GameCube system.
We're unveiling Xbox
2001.
Graphics is a computer game.
Welcome back to December of 2001. I'm going to not do that for 2002 anymore. I promise.
I don't remember 2001 sounding like that.
It's just because your memory is faded. Too many video games. I told you it would destroy your mind. But
that's got to be it.
That's got to be it, right? That's the only sound, logical explanation for this development. So, John, what is our first story?
Absolutely. Xbox launches in the US.
At the stroke of midnight on November 15th, Bill Gates handed over the very first Xbox sold in North America to Edward Glucksman at the Manhattan Toys R Us.
I remember this very much. That was such a cool moment for, because Microsoft stepping into the ring for the first time. I guess on this level of like a console release, it was exciting.
Oh, it was extremely exciting. I mean, I remember the pictures. I remember video on the news of this, and the whole idea that we were going to get a truly competitive American console for the first time, really since Coleco, was a big, huge deal. Yeah, and as an interesting side note, because a lot of these launches got moved because of the September 11th attacks, GameCube launched on the 18th, but I couldn't find any mags that had December cover dates that still covered it, so they must have just missed that print deadline. But we're going to be talking about that in our next month's jump when the GameCube launches. And the Xbox also got its big premiere in Cannes for the European market. So that's when the European press got their first hands-on over there. And that kind of left a lot of people, I mean, all the European magazines are talking about the price, because the US launch was $299 for the Xbox. The European launch of the Xbox is going to be 479 euros. So that would be in about $435 at the time. Which,
yeah, that's up there. That's such a markup.
Yeah, a massive markup. It partially had to do with fluctuations in the currency. This was this weird little historical blip where the dollar was worth more than the euro. This was like a 6-month period here, and nobody was really sure in which direction it was going to go, because the euro was coming in on the 1st of January. So at this point, the euro is still a fictitious currency that isn't really being used yet. And so there was a lot of speculation on it, and it had dipped so much that they wanted to make sure that when they set this price, and they couldn't go back on the price 4 months later, but if the currency kept dropping, they needed to have a buffer. Now, the currency is going to go up right after New Year's, or shortly after New Year's, and you're actually going to have a relatively strong currency. It's almost always going to be above the dollar. There's going to be one more dip, I think, around 2003, 2004. But other than that, it's always going to be higher than the dollar. So this price, I don't think it lasts for too long, but it was partially to shore themselves up against currency fluctuations. But also you have to remember, at this point, Europe is not really one country. It's made up of a whole bunch of different countries. And in Europe, you don't have the same system that you have in the U.S., where you look at a price like $299, but nobody is paying $299, because when you get to the cash register, they're going to be adding sales tax. So everybody in the States is paying more than $299 for this. I mean, you might be able to pay only 3% more. Sometimes you're paying 12 or 13% more. It just depends on which city you live in, sometimes which part of the city you're living in. The sales tax can differ. In Europe, sales tax is always built into the price. If it says $479, you're going to be paying $479 at the cash register. And it's always processed in such a way that the sales tax is already built into the price that is advertised. And because they were announcing one standard price for all of Europe, but those sales taxes were dramatically different from one place to the other, this was another way of making sure that no matter where they were selling the device, they always had this buffer to be able to pass on the sales tax back to the local government.
Got it. Yeah, that makes sense. Hey, and they get to drop the price later, too, so that probably works out in their favor.
That, of course, is also going to make it sound really nice, yes. But, this was a problem at this point, especially where consoles were always seemed to be considerably more expensive in Europe than in North America. So, okay. So we've got the Xbox is out there. What else we have in the console news space.
Yeah, we've talked about Xbox. We've talked about Nintendo with their GameCube. Sony invests in Square.
Following the poor performance of Final Fantasy The Spirits Within at the box office, Square has been hurting for cash, and Sony has come to its aid with a healthy 14.9 billion yen cash injection, representing about 19% ownership of the company.
Man, I think the last time I was on, I remember us talking about that poor performance happening at the time.
You mean the complete and utter cluster F that was The Spirits Within?
Hey, I was trying to be nice, but exactly that.
Yeah, basically, yes. It was the moment that they realized what's impressive story-wise in a video game is not impressive in any other medium.
Imagine that.
It's let's face it, games, especially at this point in time, I mean, this is still pre-BioShock. Games have to work on a very different level than a deep movie plot. And the fact that the Final Fantasy name, without any chocobos in sight, is not going to excite a lot of people. And they had just spent way, way too much money building up this movie studio. And, so they're basically broke, and Sony is coming in, going to help them out, and in many ways this is going to help ensure Square output on the PlayStation for quite a while.
I was going to say, I wonder if the Final Fantasy partnership that had come organically from releasing all those games on the original PlayStation had helped broker this deal.
Well, it helped broker it, but I think it also helped that Sony, with the additional competition from Microsoft, knew that they needed to have more companies supporting them. They needed more developer support. Sony did a good job purchasing studios early on. They bought Psygnosis for the launch of the original PlayStation. That's where you got games like Destruction Derby and Wipeout. And Lemmings 3D came from that purchase, as well as Discworld, I believe, was also a production from Psygnosis. So they had shored up a little bit of that, but coming into PlayStation 2, they still didn't have that much as far as true internal development. They're still betting on a lot of third parties, and you saw it with Crash Bandicoot, which ended up being owned by Universal. And so that kind of was their mascot, but then couldn't be their mascot because now it could show up on any console. Then they had Jack and Daxter, which Naughty Dog still, was a free agent, could do whatever they wanted. So this type of investment, the purchasing of studios to become in-house developers and system exclusive developers, is not something that's happening quite yet. It's on the horizon. Microsoft has been investing in studios. Sony's now going to start investing in studios, and a lot of studios will become in-house, like we see in the news all the time today, 20 years later. That's just in its infancy at this point. And I mean, 14.9 billion yen is $119 million at the exchange rate of the time. That is not chump change, but it's also not what it would have cost to buy Square. Not by a long shot.
Yeah, that's fair. Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that. It's something that's, we're just so used to it nowadays, where these companies are just absorbing everybody, but this was still not a huge thing.
No, it's not. And I mean, Square is going to be releasing games on the Game Boy Advance. We've reported about how Yamauchi, the head of Nintendo, sort of scoffed at the idea of Square games coming to the GBA, because he still felt that, they had betrayed Nintendo by not bringing Final Fantasy to the N64 like what they had originally intended. But let's face it, the cartridge would have never let them do a proper Final Fantasy style game on there. And they will release games on the GBA. They will still do some development on other systems. You're going to see Square port some stuff to the Xbox, but that's still a couple years out. So there will be some stuff going elsewhere, but they are going to be pretty faithful to the PlayStation in the coming years.
Yeah, that's a good move, especially thinking about the PlayStation Portable that eventually comes to be. They had a lot of exclusives for that one, too, when we're talking portables for... Yeah.
Yeah, and this is why, Sony is going to need that kind of content. And ultimately, the PSP and the PS Vita don't perform as well as they would have liked them to have performed. They're by no means failures. But, they never get the kind of entrenched support that Nintendo has through their internal development. And this is something that Sony and Microsoft today understand. They need to be producing games internally, but they are buying studios. The studios are doing stuff on their own. It's never going to have the same organic passing on of experience and knowledge that Nintendo can bring to the forefront due to the fact that it's truly internal development, not just corporate internal, but actually building internal development.
Right. Yeah, that's part of their core identity.
Yeah. And the fact is, you're all in the same building and, we moved this guy from this project over to this other project. It would be difficult to move, people from BioWare over to some other Microsoft-owned studio because, there are different locations, there are different corporate cultures, all this other stuff. Whereas, the team that's working on one internal Nintendo title is in the same building and shares historical ties through employee exchange and so forth with other developments inside of Nintendo. And that's an important bit of DNA and the loyalty. There's a lot of developers at Nintendo that never leave Nintendo. They've been there for 30 years and have learned from other people, and they can bring in the experience. Okay, we tried this and it didn't quite work. Double Dash. Nobody really fondly remembers Mario Kart Double Dash anymore. But there's a lot of people probably still in the Nintendo offices 20 years later who remember that mechanic didn't work. So I guess there's probably a lot of that going on too. But that's, again, a little bit of speculation since nobody really knows what happens inside the black box that is Nintendo these days.
That's true. It's funny you mentioned Double Dash. There's people that still play it online.
Well, I still have it on my system. I still, when my wife and I used to go on vacation before the kid was born, I had a laptop that's set up for gaming, and we used to play Double Dash on that.
That's true.
Yeah, but it's still not Mario Kart 64, and the Double Dash mechanic never showed up in another game again. Right.
Yeah, Nintendo definitely squelched.
Yeah. And just as another side note before we move on to the next topic, but Square Pictures, the much maligned studio that created Final Fantasy: The Spirits Within, has been shut down.
Yeah, the promise of no more Square Pictures.
Exactly. Okay, changing gears from the consoles to the arcades.
U.S. Supreme Court strikes down anti-violent game ordinance.
An Indianapolis ordinance that would have barred minors from playing violent video games in public without parental consent was supposed to go into effect on September 1st. But on October 20th, Western lower courts ruling that there was insufficient evidence to show a connection between playing violent games and violent behavior in minors, and thus the ordinance would be unconstitutional. Indianapolis Mayor Bart Peterson vowed to continue to fight against violent games, but this ordinance is no more.
I couldn't think of any arcade games that made this come to fruition.
Well, and the worst part is, it's like a decade too late. The arcades are in massive, massive decline at this point. And yeah, you still have your House of the Dead 2 is out there. There's, some Time Crisis games and the occasional beat 'em up. But, the heyday of Mortal Kombat is long over. Mortal Kombat 3, which was the last arcade version, that's, 3-4 years old at this point? This guy just seems to be living, in the 90s, wondering if he can still go after it, or even worse, it's the only thing he can do against home game is to try to lash out at the arcade games because he has no control over what people do in their homes, but he has control over what is done in public.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting to think about. I mean, this is moving at the speed of our government, unfortunately, but well, I guess fortunately in this case, but yeah, it's interesting to see how this, to see exactly, because 2001, right? We're in 2001 right now, still dealing with this.
Yeah. I mean, and the arcades are already suffering badly enough. They really don't need this too. I mean, and the court just threw it out because they actually said, hey, prove to us that there's a connection here. And when they did try to show them studies or whatever, the court was just like, there's no correlation here between the violence on the streets and violence in games. I mean, what is the purpose of this ordinance? If it's to do this, well, can you prove that it's going to do this? You can't just say, well, it's my belief that it will do it. That's not enough under the law. You actually have to show a causal nexus between the restrictions that you're putting in and the public good that is supposed to come from it. And that's what they failed to be able to prove to the court.
Right. Yeah, I mean, we know how this ended up playing out.
Yeah, exactly. Peterson is going to vow to keep doing it. Put a link to his Wikipedia page. He does a few other things in his career, but this is dead in the water.
That sounds like it. I can't get any more dead than that.
No. And sticking with the arcades.
Yes. JAMA show belongs to Sega.
Sega continued its dominance of the ever-shrinking arcade market, currently controlling about 60% of the market in Japan. Their Naomi platform is becoming more and more ubiquitous, and classic competitors like Capcom pull out of the market to concentrate on home console games.
Man, that's an end of an era with Capcom.
Yeah. I mean, Capcom is still going to occasionally have a few more releases, like some crossover stuff with SNK, but the arcade market just isn't where it's at anymore. They're also pulling out of the hardware manufacturing market, so future games are basically going to be souped-up versions of console hardware. Now, Sega is not completely out of that either. They're going to be talking about a new hardware. I mean, the Naomi board was just a Dreamcast, a souped-up Dreamcast.
Right.
And for a lot of arcade experiences, I mean, if you're doing, pachinko games or card games or, some simulator with vehicles, the Naomi is perfectly okay for that. And so at this point, it's a couple years old. It's relatively cheap to produce. And as long as they can pop in more new software into the existing hardware, it's cheap for operators to upgrade the games to keep some money flowing in, even though that industry is it's on the ropes, to say the least.
Yeah, it's interesting that the Naomi was such a powerful base, and I believe they were still. Yeah, I guess it brought about the GD-ROM technology, and I believe they were still using that into the next iterations that were based off GameCube era. Was that the Triforce? I believe. I think
Triforce.
The GD-ROM could be a source for that.
Triforce, I believe, still uses the GD-ROM as well. I'm not sure why, other than probably a piracy protection issue. That's my best guess, but.
Yeah, that'd be an interesting rabbit hole to go down. But yeah, just talking about the Naomi, they definitely had that control there. It just ended up being at the right place, right time.
Well, I mean, this is where Sega's legacy of having been a console manufacturer gives them a leg up over companies like Capcom, which, I mean, Capcom, while they had developed some amazing hardware, I mean, the CPS-1, CPS-2 systems and later iterations were amazing hardware, but because that hardware was stuck in the arcades, because the real revenue from the games was in the console ports. If you really want to know about the profit margin difference between arcades and console ports, check out my interviews with Gregory Fischbach, the co-founder of Acclaim, because that's where they made their money. And he said, it became plainly obvious the arcade was just a great place to test it, and the real money was in the console port. So for Capcom to spend a ton of money to develop their own hardware and then still have to port that software to a home platform just doesn't make any sense anymore, you know?
Right.
Because you're going to basically have to reprogram it. Why? Just so you could show off something really cool in the arcade and then have to dumb it down for the home port? That makes no sense. I mean, if you look at stuff like the PlayStation 1 port of Street Fighter Alpha 3, it still plays great, but there's a ton of animation missing and so forth because it doesn't run on that system well, you know?
Right, right.
Yeah.
Well, speaking of Sega, Sega steals the show at TGS.
The Tokyo Game Show floor was dominated by Xbox, but the highlights belonged to Sega, which came out swinging as a third-party publisher, showing off impressive Xbox previews of Gun Valkyrie, Jet Grind Radio, and glimpses of Panzer Dragoon Saga, as well as teasing an Xbox-based arcade hardware and Virtua Fighter 4 for PlayStation 2, putting to rest the myth that the hardware was impossible to pull performance from.
I had forgotten about I guess that was the Chihiro hardware?
Yeah, the Chihiro is basically a souped-up version of the Xbox, but it's not the only one Sega is going to use. They're also going to have, like you just mentioned, the Triforce, which was a souped-up version of the GameCube. And the Triforce is going to launch first, even though Chihiro gets announced first. And they're essentially going to have 3 platforms that they're developing the software for at that point. They've got, an Xbox-based one, they've got the GameCube-based one, and they're still using Naomi for the lower-end games.
Right, we talked about Super Monkey Ball being a launch title for the GameCube at one point.
Exactly.
Yeah, they're everywhere. It's it's when you mentioned the Chihiro software. I guess now later on we're finding out that you can take. They left the pads for 2 RAM chips on some of the older revisions of the Xbox, so you can actually run the arcade titles on Xbox hardware with that modification. I think it brought it up to 128 megs, which was a lot at the time.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it doesn't. I mean, the Xbox hardware at this point is so much raw power. The PlayStation 2 is using the Emotion Engine, which is a very complex architecture, very customized. The Xbox is just raw power, and it's reflected in how much money Microsoft is losing on each console sale. So it makes sense to use it in the arcade, and plus it makes porting the game from the arcade to the home essentially effortless. And because the markets are so different between those consoles, and Sega identifies, I think, here very clearly that the GameCube is going to have a very different market than the PlayStation 2 and the Xbox. It's going to be the more kid-friendly system, and it shows in the software that they develop for these 2 platforms. So the Chihiro gets House of the Dead 3, Virtua Cop 3, Outrun 3, and my personal favorite light gun game of all time, Ghost Squad. And the Triforce system, the GameCube system, gets Virtua Striker 4, Mario Kart, and F-Zero arcade games. So the stuff that they're not going to be able to sell on the other platforms anyway, the Mario licenses, the Nintendo licenses, they just develop it straight up on GameCube hardware, put it in the arcade, and then bring it over to the home. I mean, or close to bringing it home. I don't think the arcade versions of those 2 games ever do make it to the home console, but I'm sure that they reused a ton of assets.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. It's neat to be having this conversation too, because because years ago the conversation was how close can we get these arcade ports, and now we can literally flip a switch, change a couple of things, and we've got the same code base running on these home consoles, which is very cool. I guess that was Neo Geo's shtick from the beginning with their home ports, but that was a pretty penny to make all that happen.
Well, and that's the thing. I mean, Neo Geo starts it in 1991, but by 1995, Namco is using souped-up PlayStation for games like Tekken and Soul Calibur, and the other developers. It takes them a little while to get there. I mean, they're not doing it immediately. Nintendo and Sega have, their console-based multi-cart arcade cabinets, the Mega Play and Play Choice 10 and stuff. Mm-hmm. But the standalone arcade manufacturers, I think part of it was they wanted to be the most impressive thing in the arcade. And two, they did not want to be too linked to one console or the other, so they'd have the freedom of going from one machine to the other. And that's probably, actually, now that I say it, it doesn't make any sense, because the only console that mattered for the most part was the NES for years, and then the brief dalliance with the Genesis really wouldn't have made that much of a difference. It's possible they just wanted, the consoles were too weak to do anything, but the move to 3D just kind of gave the consoles the edge.
Right, definitely even the playing field. Speaking of 3D games.
Yeah.
TDK announces Aquaman game.
I had to throw this in here because it just couldn't help it. It's the game that would be second only in badness to Superman 64. So, yeah. If you haven't played the Aquaman game, have you played it?
A long time ago. I remember the articles about this game because I was at the age where I was glued to these magazines. I guess I was a little bit too young for like the early Nintendo powers, but I remember distinctly the Xbox mag, and then I guess later Nintendo Power talking about Aquaman.
Yeah, and I've only played it for like 5 minutes. It actually almost makes the controls on Superman 64 seem. It's that bad. And I mean, what do you expect from a game that is all water level? But still, it's just terrible on every single possible level. So the fact that they're bringing this out, the fact that they thought Aquaman would be a good property to convert makes no sense. Especially he hadn't been in any major media since Super Friends went off the air in 85 or 86. So, let's see. Justice League cartoon is either starting up this year or the next year. So it could be that Justice League is about to come out and he will feature prominently in that. It was in a couple episodes of the Batman animated series, in Superman animated series. So he had appeared in 2 episodes of that, which doesn't really count, but okay, I'm going way down deep in this rabbit hole.
But we digress as we reminisce.
Yes, exactly. Okay, let's keep moving on.
Yep. Engineering student lights up GBA.
The Game Boy Advance. The Game Boy Advance, despite its impressive processing power, has been criticized resoundingly for its unlit screen. One young Iowa engineering student, Adam Curtis, has decided to do something about it, though, by developing a hack to add light to the screen. While just a personal hack at this point, he would ultimately make it commercially available as the Afterburner.
Man, that's a space that was just ripe for the picking, but they don't have the same access that we do for components, because I've since done a backscreen mod on my original GBA, and it's such a luxury thing, but at the time it was so to hear somebody just taking their console apart, especially when these things were still kind of new.
Yeah, I mean, the thing is, the GBA is less than a year old at this point. I mean, we just had the launch, and but it was such a bad screen. I mean, the original GBA, it's impossible to see what the hell is going on without some light being shown directly at it. And so the Afterburner gets sold for quite a while. I remember reading about this online and being like, wow, people are modding it, people are doing stuff, and it does sort of give us that feel of, the internet is going to make this kind of small-scale manufacturing and super, super specialized product financially feasible, And that was
crazy
cool
to think about.
Yeah. Yeah. So, and I mean, nowadays, when you think about all the kind of crap that you can buy online, like right now, I'm just staring above me, I have a Retro Boy, which is this French-made kit for a Raspberry Pi Zero that looks like a Super NES controller with a screen popped on top of it. And that's my handheld emulation system. And I bought it as a kit, put it together, with circuit boards and everything. And it was relatively cheap to buy. So the idea that we live in that world today sort of starts with guys like this.
Right. We're in such a DIY era now versus this guy who's an engineering student.
Makes it possible. Yeah, and the internet makes it possible. Imagine if this guy had to put an ad in a magazine. The number of people that would actually be able to see the ad would be extremely limited. The number of people who would answer it would be so limited that he'd never actually get anywhere. But instead, now he can get stories written about him on websites. They link to his website, and boom, he's accessible a lot. And people can find him, people can send him money, and there you go.
You go. Talking about underdogs with new emerging tech, Atlantis brings PC gaming to VR.
Atlantis Cyberspace, a startup out of Hawaii, has launched Atlantis OS, a system for converting PC FPS titles such as Quake and Unreal to custom VR gear for use in arcades.
Unix system. I know this. Sorry to throw that in there. That's wow. Yeah, that's
You're making a reference to the movie Hackers.
Jurassic Park.
Oh, you're right.
They had the 3D glasses.
Yeah. Oh, you're right. I feel ashamed that I did not get that reference. Okay.
From the John Department of Corrections. I'm so sorry. That's really neat. I don't know a lot about the whole VR outside of, outside of everything now, but what was it was like Dactyl Nightmare and
Virtuality.
Virtuality, yeah, that's right. Outside of that, I'm not really familiar with the VR space around this time.
Well, Virtuality is specifically is exactly 10 years earlier.
Really?
Yeah. So we've talked about it in several stages of the 91 jumps.
Uh-huh.
So Virtuality is 10 years earlier. And so the headsets are still too pricey for anything but the arcades. And one of the downsides of Virtuality was the software, in addition to the low frame rates and everything else. But it was the software, it wasn't really what you would call great game design. It was more for that quick experience. And the idea here is if you could use the professionally designed game layouts of something like Quake or Unreal and coupled it with this technology in the arcade, you would have a fast-track way of making the experience more appealing to the customer. It's not just, I want to play for 5 minutes. I want to play it for 2 hours because I'm, engaged in getting through the levels and stuff.
Right, you get to be Quake Guy and you get to be Unreal Man.
Exactly. As far as I can tell, this doesn't really go anywhere. The company gets sold off. But there's an interesting note. The founder is this French guy, Laurent Scalier, and I'm probably butchering the pronunciation of the name, or Scalier. He would later go on to found additional VR companies, and according to his own account, he was instrumental in getting the Oculus off the ground. He was the guy who sort of prodded, and this again is his own account off of his website. I don't know enough about the history of the Oculus, but he apparently prodded the guys who did develop it to go all the way and turn it into a final product. So he's still a fairly important or influential person in the VR space today.
That's very cool. I'll have to look him up too. I hadn't heard that name prior to just now. So
yeah, I'd heard it once or twice in different articles over the years, but I didn't really know who he was. And this Atlantis OS system, it's obviously not going to go anywhere. It doesn't take over the world, especially because an FPS has to move so fast. I can't imagine how they would do that without people getting motion sick. You see it with a lot of VR games nowadays where it's like that Batman one where you're not really moving freely through the space. It's sort of jumping from position to position.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean, you're more the VR guy than I am, right? So
oh yeah, absolutely. They're still figuring out the best way to do locomotion. Everybody gets affected by it differently. So even now, and to think of them tackling this type of thing right now, it's
yeah. I mean, imagine trying to play Quake even today using VR. I'd bet at least 50% are going to puke after 30 seconds or 60 seconds at most.
If you make it that long, yeah. It's just being forcefully plunged is not something your brain is okay with when your body's not moving.
Exactly. So, yeah. But it's the beginning of what will be a career in VR.
Very cool.
And speaking of computer tech,
DirectX goes up against OpenGL.
Yes, with the almost simultaneous launches of Mac OS X 10.1 and Windows XP, the battle lines are drawn between OpenGL and DirectX. While the likes of Apple and John Carmack are hoping OpenGL will win, the hardware manufacturers seem to be betting on Bill Gates' market dominance to win the day.
I mean, they just released the DirectX box.
Exactly. And yeah, the OpenGL standard, I don't know enough about the technological side of it to say the pros and cons. But yeah, it's open. It's not necessarily going to be as progressive as Microsoft can be in this front. And of course, DirectX wins the day, especially because Apple, despite its proclamations, never really cares about games and never really gives them the support that they need.
Yeah, they do. Although OpenGL gets supported by Linux, and a lot of what we're doing now is still based on that until the recent Vulkan developments.
Yeah, that's true. But I mean, for the average everyday gamer, Linux is just not there, you know.
True. Yeah, OpenGL's something that never goes DirectX a very long. Still does.
Yeah, I mean, if you're playing on a PC, you're playing with DirectX.
Did you write the marketing for that, or is that?
It's pure strategic. I mean, it's just pure statistics. Sorry,
fair enough.
Yeah. Oh well. Okay, and let's move on to some. I don't want to. No, this one's not lighter. Sorry, but it's still PC.
EA puts down Ultima Remake.
The web has been a breeding ground for mods and remakes of classic games. One of the old-time classics, Ultima, has attracted a ton of fan attention, and a new project, Ultima Reborn, a 3D remake of the original Ultima from 1981, sadly, their request for permission from EA has fallen on deaf ears, and despite approval from Lord British himself, the project will ultimately be renamed and become simply Ultima Inspired.
Do we know what this project became?
It changed its name, and I have a link to it in the show notes, but it never gets finished.
Oh, that's unfortunate. Yeah, it's so hard for these types of games or these types of mods to come around. And yeah, when the parent company doesn't want something to happen.
Yeah. Well, and this one isn't even a mod. I mean, this was a full 3D rebuild. And so, you know, they're having to create almost all the assets from scratch. And this is the days before there's, you know, a almost unlimited number of 3D assets to download on the internet and stuff. And especially Ultima 1, because that's got like spaceships and fantasy and all sorts of stuff in it. It would have really been a massive undertaking that I don't think they could have ever actually finished.
Yeah, you have to think of computers at the time too.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, that's quite the undertaking.
I mean, yeah, and if you started developing on OpenGL, what are you going to do once you have to move to DirectX? It's just a pain in the ass.
Right, exactly. I love how Lord British is like, I love this, go for it. Without any horse in the race legally.
Yeah, legally he has nothing to say. He's left the company years ago, but, you know, he's like, yeah, I think this is great. I was like, dude. I don't know if it was this project or another project that ends up one of the EA spokespeople makes a real bad misstep and ends up giving a line saying Richard Garriott giving their approval is it would be the same as if Toto was telling you could make a copy of Wizard of Oz. And yeah, that went over like a lead freaking balloon, especially with the fans. But, you know, it's EA, so.
Right.
It's the least of their evils or missteps with PR.
Yeah, I can't imagine. Speaking of rights, Alone in the Dark film rights acquired.
Very nice transition.
Yeah.
Dimension Films has acquired the rights to the Infogrames survival horror franchise. Will the game that inspired Resident Evil be able to surpass its protege at the box office? No. The answer is no.
Yeah, I was waiting for that one.
No.
There's a word attached to it.
Yeah. So you're familiar with the Alone in the Dark games, right?
Yes.
Well, so the original one is set, you know, in a 1920s style old villa, very Lovecraftian. And have you ever seen Alone in the Dark, the movie?
No, I have not.
It's Christian Slater in modern day New York in a museum. And yeah, that's really all I have to say. It's an Uwe Boll movie.
There it is.
And it's, oh my God. I didn't get through all of it. I watched probably about 10 minutes. It was so bad.
Oh, geez. I'm surprised Christian Slater signed on for something like that with such a powerhouse behind the camera.
At this point, Christian Slater would have signed up for almost anything. His career had tanked by 2002.
How close was this to Blood Rain? I'm trying to remember when that came out.
Oh, Blood Rain comes out after this. Blood Rain is a PlayStation 2 game. Remember, PlayStation 2 has not been on the market that long, and Blood Rain is a PlayStation 2 property. So let me just do a quick IMDb search. So Blood Rain is a 2005 release.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, so we've got a while to go. Yeah, because I think Blood Rain was maybe, and I'm afraid these words are coming out of my mouth, one of the better Uwe Boll releases, at least the first one was.
I honestly, I never saw it. I didn't see any of there's 3 Blood Rain movies I'm seeing here, which is kind of scary. In addition to animes. Weird. Okay.
Right.
Yeah, so there's Blood Rain 2005, then Blood Rain Deliverance 2007, and Blood Rain the Third Reich in 2011.
That's right. Either they did really well, or nobody told him he could stop whenever he wanted.
I think the other ones were just straight to DVD, but then again, House of the Dead got a sequel, so, you know.
Yes.
I mean, the man has only made one decent movie, and that was Postal. So I guess we had to go through all the other ones to get there.
Postal is a pretty unique film.
Oh, I love that
it's
movie.
One of...
It's such a bad movie in so many respects, but I just get a kick out of it every time I see it.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. That's a personal favorite, too.
Yeah.
And it totally shouldn't be.
No, it shouldn't be. But there's so many great lines, like, you know. and the end times will come when a diminutive actor is raped by 1,000 monkeys.
All right. Well, speaking of adaptations, House of the Dead movie moves forward.
Oh, yeah, I can't get rid of the bull. The House of the Dead movie has a writer, and Mark Altman, and will be a prequel to the games explaining the origin of the zombie menace. A game based on the movie is in early production at WoW Entertainment.
I'm not sure I'm familiar with the House of the Dead story. All I know is you shoot zombies, and that's about it.
Well, I'm just going to do the bullet points because you can go deep on this too. But
sure.
There's a corporation that's been making the zombies, and in the first game, it kind of sort of starts out by looking like it's in the 20s, sort of alone in the dark, and you arrive at this what looks like a giant sanitarium, and the zombies are attacking the staff. And you get there, and there's this girl who you obviously know, and she gets kidnapped by this giant flying monster. And so as you go through it, you discover that the zombies are really sort of fat grown. They're not, you know, people who were who got a contagion, but they're actually that grown. And there's like cyber zombies, and it's just this guy producing some drugs or genetic mutations, and the story gets complicated and convoluted after that. But it's these secret agents trying to stop this giant corporation from making these zombies, these monsters.
Got it.
Yeah.
I think.
And the movie plays on an island with a bunch of college students invited to a giant party, and the stragglers show up to the party. Everybody's gone, and then they get attacked by the partygoers who have been turned into zombies. And it makes no sense because that's not the story of the games at all. But oh well.
Yeah, this was the day and age where they were just slapping the name on things. It's got zombies, close enough.
Yeah, I mean, the Postal movie has nothing to do with the game either, so from that point of view.
That's true. But is Postal really about anything? I think that's the only formula that works, because it's not.
That is a good question. Although they do have that scene where Uwe Boll gets attacked by the developer of the original game for
that's true.
misconstruing the game completely, and the movie having nothing to do with the game, which I thought was a great touch. But
when in doubt, go meta.
Exactly. Just, you get rid of all criticisms just by admitting that it's crap.
There you go.
Okay, but something that wasn't crap.
Exactly. Speaking about gaming in the media, Scott McCloud takes on gaming.
Comic book luminary Scott McCloud has created a multi-page comic trying to understand gaming in this month's computer gaming world. The insights into the medium are quite compelling as he foreshadows the blurring of the lines between gaming realities and the real world we experience today.
That's interesting timing, because I remember being blown away by the launches and just the leaping graphics that all these new consoles have, and being relevant to how, we're blurring the lines of what these games can look like, because it's a little bit more... it's less believable when you've got 2D characters versus these full 3D characters that could very well be in the real world, I guess.
Yeah, and I mean, obviously, if you look back at those games today, it's horribly primitive, but at the time it really did give us that effect, when textures on the characters started to look actually like something akin to skin and stuff. Right. And that's one aspect of what he talks about. Another aspect that he talks about is he breaks it down into decisions. He's like, what defines reality as opposed to linear media like comics, which is his area of expertise, and television and so forth, is that the viewer is not making choices. Whereas in a game, it's all about decisions. So the type of decisions you make define the type of game that you're playing. And he really comes at it from the point of view of a non-gamer or a gamer light. And it's really insightful. I highly recommend. I'll put a link directly to it in the show notes. It's up on archive.org. I really do recommend everybody read it because it is really, really good. And he talked about how an expansion of the choices we can make is going to be bringing games closer and closer to the realities that we live in. And considering that this is the month that the first couple reviews for Grand Theft Auto 3 come out, and there's going to be all the big reviews will be next month. And he's writing this not knowing that that's coming, but that era of the open world, the being able to interact with almost everything idea is really taking off, really, really shows the insight into, understanding this as a separate medium with its own positives as well as negative, and being able to define it as in relationship to reality. And I think that that's really what Scott McCloud always does really, really well, and he knocks it out of the park with this piece.
Yeah, that's really thought-provoking. I'm not familiar with the article, but I will make myself. And yeah, it's the whole intrigue that I get from this is just, as you said, the timing.
Yeah, I mean, and he's coming at it actually, he explains how he met up with the editors at CGW, and because he was a Mac user, because of his art, he had very limited access to games, so they sent him a bunch of games that had been ported to the Mac, or Mac-specific games, and that's kind of his into it. It's what he knows at that point about games and what he's able to distill from that limited experience is really, really insightful, because he really just encapsulates, all games are broken down into the decisions that you make. That's what defines a game, a video game, a computer game. And I really think he's onto something with that definition. And it's always been one of the toughest things in the study of this field is what is a game? When people argue about what was the first video game, did it have to have an end screen? Did it have to have a goal? Did you have to have a winner and a loser? What makes it a game? And that's where his definition about it's just about choices. So that I think is, something that we often overlook in the scholarly approach to this. And I think that his outsider perspective is something that we should be taking a closer look at.
Yeah. I was going to ask if he was coming as somebody who was just purely an artist or like what we these days consider a hardcore gamer type thing. It definitely, sometimes it takes somebody who's not engulfed in the subject to bring in that perspective, because they're just learning it. They pick up on different, certainly pick up on things that, when we've been staring at something for so long that we just kind of take for granted, don't really think about subconsciously.
Exactly. We can't see the forest for all the trees.
There it is.
Yeah, exactly. So, okay, good. I think we are now done. We are at the end of our trip. John, just one task remains. What is the word of the episode?
I'm going to have to go with Polaroid.
I love it. Polaroid it is. John, thank you as always for coming here, for sharing in all of this joy and excitement with us. And where can everybody find you?
Thank you. I just want to start by saying thank you so much for having me again. I'm glad. I'm very honored that I can kick off the new year too with all of this. I'm looking forward to what's to come this year. But yeah, you can find us at RetroGameSquad.com. We're on all of your major podcast consuming library. I don't even know what to call it. Yeah, whatever your aggregator for podcasts are, we're on there. We're on Spotify. We're on Apple Podcasts. Just search us up as Retro Game Squad. And if you ever want to continue our side of the conversation, we do have a Discord around there too, and that's discord.retrogamesquad.com. We're getting to be a pretty lively bunch over there. So,
oh yeah, it's a lot of fun. Lot of fun. Okay, and remember everybody, all the links to everything we talked about today are in the show notes below. Consider supporting us on Patreon, $1 a month. It helps us just cover the cost. Plus, it's kind of nice to know that everybody is enjoying it, and gives us a little bit of feedback too. Okay, and also video versions of the 7 Minutes in Heaven are always there for the patrons. Okay.
Your kids are going to love it.
Okay, that was a Back to the Future reference. I'm not so tired that I didn't catch that one. Okay, with that being said, have fun, everybody.